College. Welcome to another edition of After Hours. Today I want to take a little bit of time to expand the relationship that the scripture talks about between the prophet Elijah and John the Baptist. John is closely identified with Elijah in scripture, and we can see many reasons why this would be the case. When John the Baptist appeared on the scene in Israel, his clothing, his food, his lifestyle were they gave a great reminder. They were very reminiscent of the way Elijah the prophet had actually come on the scene in Israel and lived and ministered. And this included right down to the very end of John the Baptist's life, where we see that just as Elijah himself had been persecuted by a wicked king and that wicked king's wife, and in particular even the wife was more stringent against Elijah, the same thing happens with John the Baptist right up to the time when the wicked wife of Herodias, actually is working to have John the Baptist beheaded. So I want to take it and expand this out, because the New Testament doesn't just say that they're a little bit like each other, but actually references John the Baptist as fulfilling the role of Elijah. Now, this is because Elijah was a very powerful prophet. As you remember, he was taken up to heaven without even dying. The chariots of God came and took him up. And for this reason, later on, at the very close of the Old Testament canon in the book of Malachi, we read in Malachi 4, verses 5 and 6, "See, I will send you the prophet Elijah before that great and dreadful day of the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children and the hearts of the children of the fathers, or else I'm going to strike the land with a curse." And so Israel had developed this idea that Elijah was going to return. They oftentimes thought that he was going to come back out of heaven in the flesh. It wasn't going to be one like Elijah. It was actually going to be Elijah himself that would come before the Messiah would come. And so we can see this, for example, in John chapter 1, where people were going to John the Baptist, particularly Pharisees and scribes were coming to John the Baptist, and they were asking him, "Who are you? Are you Elijah?" Now, interestingly, John said, "I am not." And they said, "Are you the prophet?" referring back to Deuteronomy 18. He said, "No." And they said, "Who are you?" And John said, "I'm the voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord." Now, in reality, that figure is doing the same thing that we were told Elijah is going to do. But there could be a question, well, why did John say he was not Elijah if, in fact, other places in the New Testament we're going to see link him with it? Well, that's because, number one, they had a false understanding. They thought Elijah was literally coming out of heaven to come back down to earth, and that was not the case. John the Baptist had been born of his mother. He had come about through a normal means of human procreation. So he's not Elijah in that sense, and he's not doing what they thought that he was going to be doing. And so he answered with the passage from Isaiah, because that was one that they were not thinking through. It wasn't as fully developed. And he was saying, this is what I'm doing. I'm calling the people, preparing them for the coming of the Lord, the coming of the Messiah. So just like Jesus had to deal with false expectations and was careful in how he responded to people and the titles he took, so John's having to do it and saying, I'm not Elijah in the sense that you're thinking he is. But we do see in the New Testament throughout that that John the Baptist is linked with Elijah. He is referred to as one coming in the spirit and the power of Elijah. So even in Luke chapter 1, before John the Baptist is even born, the prophecies about him, we're told that the angel is speaking to Zechariah, and he says, he, speaking of John the Baptist, will go on before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah to turn the hearts of the fathers that are children, the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. So notice it quotes from Malachi there that Elijah and turning the hearts of the fathers to their children. But it then also links by saying, make ready a people prepared for the Lord, is making reference to the Isaiah text that John himself will use so much in the future. But notice it doesn't say that it's actually Elijah. It says he's coming in the spirit of Elijah. And Jesus answers all questions for us by later on in Mark's gospel, the disciples are going to say, hey, the people, the teachers say that Elijah has to come. This is after the transfiguration, when the disciples have seen and they saw Elijah and Moses there on the mount with Jesus. As they're coming back down the mountain, they said, but a lot of the religious leaders say that Elijah has to come. And Jesus's answer in Mark chapter 9, verses 12 and 13 is, to be sure, Elijah does come first and restores all things. Why then is it written that the Son of Man must suffer much and be rejected? But I tell you, Elijah has come, and they have done to him everything they wish, just as is written about him. So Jesus here again is saying, look, Elijah does come, and it in fact was John the Baptist. But notice, they think that restores all things means that everything is set right. But notice that it says when the Son of Man comes, when the Messiah comes, he's actually going to suffer. For example, in Isaiah 53, another one of those texts in the book of Isaiah where he says he's preparing the way for the Lord, but when the Lord comes, he's the suffering servant. So restoring all things must not mean what you thought. And you can realize this by the fact that when Elijah came, John the Baptist, they did to him what they wanted. They beheaded the prophet who came in the spirit of Elijah. He was no more received today than he was when Elijah really came. And this is an important lesson for us. It's actually the lesson that Mark was teaching by sandwiching the story of the beheading of John the Baptist in the middle of the report regarding the apostles going forth and preaching the kingdom. It is a reminder that the kingdom is different than we expected, and that we should not be surprised by suffering. And that suffering does not mean that we thought the kingdom was coming, but it's not. No, the one who was like Elijah coming and suffering and being beheaded was actually a sign the kingdom was coming. It was different than what we might expect. But the good news is, as in the day of Elijah, Jezebel does not have the final word. So in the days of John the Baptist, Herod and Herodias did not have the final word. As in when Jesus stands before the Sanhedrin and he stands before Pilate, they do not have the final word. So it is in our day. Whatever would happen to you or I, as we fulfill the role, so to speak, of Elijah and of John the Baptist, as we fulfill the role of the disciples of Christ and we go forth and proclaim the word, we may be rejected. We may have to suffer for the kingdom, but the good news is our God reigns. He is fulfilling his purpose. His kingdom is coming. His will is going to be done. And at the end of all days, we are going to stand in front of him, and he will reward those who have been faithful. So brothers and sisters, whether it is sitting there like John the Baptist about to be beheaded, whether one is thrown in jail like Martin Luther King Jr. was and wrote his famous letter from a Birmingham jail, whether it is you and I just bearing ridicule and mocking, whatever happens, we can rejoice because we know that our God reigns. And in the end, righteousness will reign upon the earth because he is going to establish it in his time. I hope this is helpful. I hope it encourages you. I remind you this week, let's be praying for Vacation Bible School as we're helping to shape the next generation by the gospel. And I look forward to us coming together to worship again this Sunday. Have a great week. God bless.